Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. As we get settled in, like you guys are doing, just please write in the chat box where you're joining us from, and please honor the land in which you occupy. We're going to get started in very few short seconds. So my name is Chantelle Ibrahimi, and I'm an MA student in the Franz Fanon Center for Intersectional Psychology and the Mental Health Equity Lab at the New School, and I'm joining in from Brooklyn. I would like to acknowledge that I occupy the traditional land of the Lenape and Canarsie people. And on behalf of the organizing committee, which includes Mariam Omidi, Karet Munguldar, Edlian Medina Escobar, Jeremy Kelleher, and Hillary Litwin, we welcome you to the third day of the Graduate Student-Led Conference. So today's panel is titled Decolonizing Mental Health, Rethinking Psychotherapy. And these next 2 hours, we'll be discussing different ways to rethink psychotherapy with the help from our three panelists, Dr. Carmen Inoa Vazquez, Silvia Dutchevici, and Dr. Candice Nicole Hargons. And our discussant for the day will be Dr. Consuelo Cavalieri. And we'll close our day with a wonderful performance from the New School's Flex Dancers. So before we get started, we wanted to thank Dr. G for all its help and support, as well as our sponsors, the Psychology Department at the New School for Social Research, the Safran Center for Psychological Services, the University Student Senate, and Public Seminar for making this conference free. And to pay it forward, we ask you to consider donating to our three recommended organizations. So they are the Flex Dance Program, the Ancient Song Duo Services, and New Immigrant Community Empowerment Organization. And so more information can be found in the chat box or on the conference registration page, so keep an eye out for those links. And I want to remind everyone that today's session will be recorded, so please keep that in mind as you post your questions. We want to make sure that we are very sensitive to any vulnerable populations that are present. And just as a reminder, if you're joining us for the first time today, this is how we'll be using the chat box and the Q&A box. So the chat box will be used to communicate with each other, so please feel free to support one another, talk to each other, and the Q&A function will be specifically to ask questions. So you can ask your questions either anonymously, so for the moderator to read your question, or if you would like to ask your question yourself and actually join the panel, just make sure your name is visible. I think that wraps it up for the day, and I would like to now turn it over to Karet to lead us through some body-based exercises.
Thank you, Chantal. Hi, everyone. I'm Karet, PhD student from the Attachment Lab. I am very feeling moved from the last 2 days and also feeling bittersweet that this is our last day of the conference. And so I would like to invite us to take this moment to connect with that feeling. Whatever you have been feeling in the last 2 days, or if you're joining us for today new, taking this moment to be present. So you can get settled in on your chairs, or if you're sitting on the floor. Hips relaxed, feet on the ground, shoulders relaxed, spine long and smooth. Please take this moment to let go of any tension that you may be holding on in your body. See if you can allow yourself to be just smoothing certain tensions. You can close your eyes or keep your eyes open and focus on an object or a place, finding your safe and comfortable place from wherever you are. Taking a deep inhale and exhale. Now please rub your hands, creating some warmth. And place one hand on your heart and the other hand on the belly, right under the belly button. And if it's available to you, just press a little bit, feeling the weight of your own hand connecting with your own energy, and see how it feels to feel your own presence. Breathe. And let's rub the hands again. And this time, you can place your hands on a part of your body that needs healing. So wherever that you may be holding on some tension, a part of your body or an emotion that could benefit from your own warmth and compassion. Please connect with your breath. And now I invite us, we are 342 people connected from all around the world, to share a metta meditation, a moment for loving kindness. I will share the words, and please internally you can repeat if you wish, and see how the words resonate with you. You can close your eyes or keep them open as I read. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be free of suffering. May I be free of mental anxiety. May I live in peace. May my life be blessed with ease. May we, all beings, the ones we can see, the ones we can't see, be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free of suffering. May all beings be free of mental anxiety. May all beings live in peace. May our lives be blessed with ease. Take this moment. Thank you for joining in, and welcome to the third day of Decolonizing Psychology conference.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hillary Litwin. I'm a second-year doctoral student in the clinical psychology program at the New School. I'm in the Franz Fanon Center for Intersectional Psychology and also the Mental Health Equity Lab. And it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. I'm going to begin with Dr. Carmen Inoa Vazquez, one of New York City's most prominent Latina psychologists with over 25 years of clinical and teaching experience, works both with bilingual and monolingual children, individuals, couples, and families. She founded the Bilingual Treatment Program Clinic, located at Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan. Dr. Inoa Vazquez continues supervising psychology students at Columbia University. After 16 years directing the New York University Bellevue Clinical Psychology Internship Program, she went on to found and direct the Institute for Multicultural Behavioral Health, where she coordinated training and research, as well as providing supervision for and teaching doctoral psychology trainees and medical students. She is a diplomat in clinical psychology and in forensic clinical psychology, served as clinical professor in psychiatry at NYU School of Medicine. She held positions as professor of psychology at CUNY, New School, State University of New York, and others. She also maintains a private practice in Manhattan where she provides neuropsychological evaluations to children and adults, as well as psychotherapy services. Dr. Vazquez is a noted authority on Latin American mental health and bicultural lifestyles. She's authored several books and chapters, including Parenting with Pride Latino Style, The Maria Paradox, and Grief Therapy with Latinos. She has also edited Latina Psychologists Thriving in the Cultural Borderlands. Next is Silvia Dutchevici. She is the founder and president of the Critical Therapy Center with more than 15 years experience in social services, nonprofit organizations, and a passion for psychotherapy. Silvia created the Critical Therapy Center in recognition of the need to expand psychoanalytic praxis to include and be mindful of the ways race, class, gender, and religion interact with psychological conflicts. She has a strong background in psychoanalytic theory and trauma with a focus on torture. Through the years, dissatisfied with the limits of psychoanalysis, Silvia began incorporating critical pedagogy and liberation psychology in her work with patients, creating critical therapy, focusing on issues regarding empowerment and liberation. Critical therapy analyzes the way ideology is present in the clinical hour and believes that psychotherapy requires an interrogation of both the therapist and the patient's worldviews. Silvia obtained her master's degree in social work from NYU. She is also a graduate of the New School for Social Research with a master's degree in psychology and a bachelor's degree in religious studies and political science from Fordham. She trained at Bellevue NYU Survivors of Torture program, the Parent-Child Center of the New York Psychoanalytic Society and the New York Freudian Society. She is the member of the National Association of Social Workers, Psychologists for Social Responsibility, and the Association of Women in Psychology. She is also a member of Physicians for Human Rights Asylum Network, where she conducts psychological evaluations documenting evidence of torture and persecution for survivors fleeing danger in their home countries. Then we have Dr. Candice Nicole Hargons. Dr. Hargons is an award-winning assistant professor of counseling psychology at the University of Kentucky, where she studies sex, social justice, and leadership, all with a love ethic. Additionally, Dr. Hargons is the founder of the Center for Healing Racial Trauma. Dr. Hargons is the creator of the Ally and Accomplice meditation for cultivating an anti-racist mindset and the Black Lives Matter meditation for healing racial trauma, which has been featured in the Huffington Post and Blavity and used by universities and private practices across the US. She has also created How to Love a Human, an open research podcast project that asks people with multiple marginalized identities what the world would be like if it loved them. Dr. Hargons has been featured in the Huffington Post, Business Insider, Therapy for Black Girls, Good Housekeeping, Women's Health, Blavity, and the New York Times. And then our moderator, Dr. Consuelo Cavalieri. She completed her PhD in counseling psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison as a doctoral intern at the University of California's Child Trauma Research Project. She served as a treating clinician in a randomized control trial of child-parent psychotherapy, an evidence-based approach to treating trauma in young children. Her doctoral research investigated the attachment representations of mothers of preschool-age children. Dr. Cavalieri combines her interest in early childhood mental health with a focus on Indigenous perspectives on family and tribal wellness. She is interested in indigenizing early childhood psychotherapy for tribal peoples by drawing upon their knowledge systems and care networks to inform the healing process. Dr. Cavalieri actively cultivates professional relationships with local communities. She has been an invited speaker at the Minnesota American Indian Mental Conference, delivered guest presentations at the Indian Health Board in Minneapolis, and has been involved in a collaboration with the state of Minnesota and the University of Minnesota to train early childhood mental health clinicians in developmentally informed evidence-based approaches across Minnesota. Wherever you are in the world, please give a warm welcome to our panelists.
We'll begin today with Dr. Vazquez's presentation. So if you want to go ahead and share your PowerPoint slides, Dr. Vazquez.
Ah, brother. Let's get this right squares.
On mute. Okay. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, the sound's coming through.
Oh, okay. Good morning. Good morning. Where I am is the morning. First, I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this conference, so much needed and such a interesting and much important topic. I am honored to be here with so many wonderful colleagues. And again, congratulations for such a wonderful job. I've been watching all of these past 2 days, and it has been wonderful. So today, obviously in 15 minutes, I am going to share with you an application of testimonial therapy, particularly with Latinas. This application can be applied, can be used with other populations, but today I am going to focus on Latinas. So testimonial therapy, as used with Latinas in my private practice, is an interactional process where the seeker of the services, which can be referred to as the patient, as the client, and the provider of these services, which could be referred as the therapy, psychologist, etc., share with each other. It is applying a technique that works quite well with the Latino community, which is the storytelling. It is allowing the story to come through and hearing the story from the point of view of the person that has been the affected by these stressors, and who has been should be considered the expert in what she is presenting to us. And so that we can see that this is really an interaction where the provider of services is not going to be just going to take a helping posture. It is really going to be a more interactional posture, where then the client, the patient, the seeker of services is going to inform us, and together we are going to find an understanding that will provide cultural survival. So the culture is very much applied, her agency with her decisions of self-managing, self-decisions, and her resilience. It can also provide an opportunity of finding one voice, because we know that finding the voice is a very powerful experience that helps the Latina to be aware of the interaction and interconnection of the socio-political and historical experiences of oppression and trauma that she has felt, but also her ancestor. So it's including the ancestor, first and second generations, even though maybe the Latina doesn't speak Spanish, maybe the Latina has been born here in the United States or in another country. Still, the point is that the narrative that are brought through testimonial therapy really include the stressors that have been felt throughout the different generations. Part of the inclusion of the culture is really first recognizing the intersection of her gender, ethnicity, migration, ageism, and class. These different definers do not have to be all in one person, but they could be. And then the concept of orgullo, which is pride in oneself, pride in the culture, pride in your ancestor, pride in your ancestry overall, and the importance of the family. or familismo, which is central to the Latino culture. It's a concept that is very important also in other cultures, but at the moment I am referring to the Latino culture and familismo. And we will see what I mean by that shortly. So the concept of intersectionality, which was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, informs us on the importance of understanding how the woman who is quite often, if she has a family, the center of the family, is so important to the entire family. But when we also talk about women's rights and to have systems understand the importance of having a solid well-being, self-esteem, is that if a woman is functioning to the best of her capacity as an individual, her family will also be benefiting from that. In finding one's voice, as I said, this can be seen as a very, very powerful experience, because we know that through the expression of one's voice in testimonial therapy, within a supportive stance, feelings that could be affecting the person, whether they are feelings of depression, feelings of anxiety, sleeplessness, post-traumatic stress. We know that Latinas in studies have shown higher level of depression than other groups. We know that Latina teenagers, adolescents, have shown higher level of suicidality than other groups. So finding one's voice has been found to be an empowering technique or practice. So how does the three generations, how can we understand the connections of three generations? What is it that the narrative of these women all show as being affected simultaneously, that continue being affected? So we have again, the conflicting narrative of gender, race, migration, class, and language. But what is amazing, and amazing in the sense of disturbing, is that there is always a sense of feeling I am not good enough. This affects the career, this affects their formal education, this affects their functioning overall in their producing or achieving their potential. They talk about feelings of isolation. They are contradictory message that bring this, because they are brought by the remnants of migration across generation. I do not have time to go over all of the specifics, but these stressors are rampant. So the therapist or the provider of services provides a self-disclosure that is appropriate and if appropriate. And this is really the interactional process. It is receiving from the seeker of services a history, story, sharing a story. And the interaction is not to benefit me, the therapist, personally. It is to help me, the therapist, to help to understand what is going on. But if I have felt it, the theory on the flesh, then I have felt this, and I can share this with the Latina. And this has been very much drawn from the stereotype, the concept of stereotype embodiment theory, which really started with the negative effect of ageism. This did not start with Latinas per se, but it has been adapted to work with Latinas across all ages. And then this consider the internalization of the dominant culture's negative stereotypes. So that if you are gordita, if you are a little fat, if your skin is too dark, if your hair is curly, if your nose is wide, you don't fit into the picture of blonde, blue-eyed, thin, perfect looking, considered beautiful woman. So then the internalization is, well, if I don't have that, those features, then I am not that pretty. And this also applies to ageism, which is really that once you reach a certain age, to have white hair is a privilege. To have the wisdom that you can get with the age is a privilege. This needs to be understood as really what are our strengths? What is it that we should be proud of in the way we look, in the way we talk, because this also can apply to having an accent. And I have seen in the narrative a mother, for example, putting a clothespin on her daughter's nose because the mother trying to do the best she can in her mind to make her daughter's nose look pretty. Because consider pretty is a nose that is straight. Obviously, the clothespin didn't work. It did more harm, unintended harm to the person, to this Latina, than the mother was aware of. But she was able to be self-empowered psychologically and to know that the way she was beautiful. Her narrative then facilitates this. The voice facilitates this. So the first generation stressors that are brought by forced migrations bring a sense of not being good enough because there is a lowering often in the social status as well. Many of the people that migrate have a drop in their income status. Many professional people or people that have had different jobs in their place of birth would be making less money or they have to be doing jobs that are considered by the world out there, menial jobs that are not worthy. And they all have suffered, or many have suffered, political oppression. I came to this country, I was brought to this country because we had political oppression. I am from the Dominican Republic. We had a dictator there who was ruling for 30 years, who was dictating what we should say, whom we should like, what picture we can have in our homes. So this oppression is carried on. And then this intersectional component that have brought discrimination to the woman includes mental health issues. Same thing with the second generation, double messages, the family comes first, but you need to be perfect. We are less than, so we need to be better than. And there is always this stress, this on really not being good enough. And this is different from striving to be good. It's totally different. It's just not feeling good enough. The sense of not being good enough is also expressed and shared by third generation, again, by their body, by the look, by maybe the background, feeling embarrassed by grandmothers or by moms, color, hair, old fashioned. And the dynamics oppress everyone. So these are the dynamics of oppression. How can they be understood? The parents experience very painful, have experienced very painful circumstances based on their socioeconomic realities of poverty and deprivation that quite often they have to face when they migrate. And that these, they make it as definers of their self-worth. but it is really based on society's views. They adopt these sometimes as true definers. And many of these feelings do not come out as they are not aware that this is going on. So through the voice, through the narration, these inconsistencies become very clear, and again serve to psychologically self-empower oneself. So basically, in summary, we have seen that testimonial therapy can provide an opportunity of freedom to find one's voice, to understand the effects of sociopolitical, historical, communal experiences of oppression and trauma. And testimonial therapy also helps the Latina or the seeker of services to understand the oppression, the effect, the negative effect, and then work against those effects and kind of like just vote out, throw away those pressures based on her intersectionality and on oppression overall. So it helps, it has this technique helps many Latinas and their families to feel psychologically self-empowered through the experiences, through the narration of the negative experiences, while simultaneously understanding that the source of their emotional discomfort relates to feeling oppressed, marginalized, victimized, and traumatized from values and beliefs in the outside. So this obviously is a very brief explanation of this technique. So if anyone would like to know more in more detail, I know that there's wonderful work out there, but I have written an application of transnational feminist practice with Latina across different lifestyle, which is all compiled in transnational feminist theory and practice, put a very wonderful work that has been compiled by Caroline Zer-N, Lilian Comas Diaz, and Thema Brian Davis. This was just published in June of this year. So thank you so much for allowing me to share my work with you. I am very happy.
Thank you, Dr. Vazquez. It is such an honor to have the knowledge of an elder with us here today, such as you. We're going to move on to Silvia next.
Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hello from Jackson Heights, home of the Lenape tribes. I am grateful to be with you here today, and I thank you for joining us. I know it's a Sunday morning or Sunday evening, wherever you are, and I know how time is precious. I also know that we're all zoomed out, so it's great that you can join us. I also want to thank the students and the organizers of this conference. It is such an important conference. I've enjoyed every piece of it, and I am glad to be a part of it. So before we start, I want to sort of put a context to everything. So let's start with this. We live in the time of Trump, white supremacy, coronavirus, which revealed the deep economic, racial, and gender inequalities in our society. In a time when mental health support and psychotherapy is much needed, I ask all of us, what does it mean to decolonize psychotherapy? Well, I think in order to decolonize psychotherapy, we have to first recognize that for people of color in particular, traditional psychotherapies focus on the person, while ignoring wider system of oppression, things systemic abuse, cycle of collective trauma are not helpful. In fact, I would even go a step further to say that they can be harmful. We also need to recognize that for Black, Indigenous, and Brown people, historical traumas of oppression and colonization play a major role in their mental health, and that these traumas need to be analyzed and addressed. So how do we decolonize psychotherapy? I think we disrupt it. We reinvent it. We allow patients to claim their power within the consulting room so that they can do so in other area of their lives. We also analyze and talk openly about power dynamics inside and outside the consulting room because the personal is always political. So as you all know, in traditional psychotherapy, the therapist has inherent power and authority in the therapeutic room. Much like the colonizer, their very presence influences and informs the therapeutic session. So how do we dismantle traditional dynamics of power in psychotherapy? Well, for us, one of the fundamental differences between critical therapy and traditional psychotherapy is our engagement with power analysis. And I also want to sort of tell you a little bit that, critical therapy comes from three schools of thought. We practice and we embrace psychodynamic theory in combination with liberation psychology and critical pedagogy. So in critical therapy, through active dialogue in sessions, patients and therapists engage in the process of critically analyzing the world by looking at power relation. Power is at the core of our work. We analyze power in terms of both societal structures, think race, class, gender, immigration status, so forth, and from an interpersonal perspective, family relationship dynamics, and so forth. We look at the patient's relation to power, and we also actively question and analyze the therapist's position to power, and as well as within the clinical dyad, as well as in society. Further, we analyze how power affects and informs the therapeutic relationship, and in doing so, patients quickly begin to see how power manifests in their daily interactions while simultaneously challenging therapists to check their own bias. So you might ask yourselves, clinically, why should we talk about power? Well, because it's related to one's mental health, because power exists in every relationship, and because its intersectionality has shown us issues around race, class, gender, and other individual characteristics intersect with one another and overlap, creating an array of power dynamics. And those dynamics intersect with one's mental health and well-being. So as a critical therapist, we all come into the consulting hour with certain beliefs. We believe that power is always already present in the room. It is found through unspoken values, assumptions, and practices. For example, as a therapist, what are your practices around self-determination, collaboration, and democratic participation? Does your psychological intervention promote social justice? So the critical therapy model, as I've said, power is at the core of our work. Our relationship to power changes over time in the therapeutic dyad, depending on stages of the clinical process. Now, I want to also remind you a little bit that these stages are not necessarily linear. Overall, they are, and we could talk a little bit more about that, but sometimes in one session, the stages could happen from 1, 2, and 3. So they could be a little more circular as well. We change, so to be perfectly sort of transparent, we change our stance throughout the treatment in our dynamics and relationship to power. This change is intentional as to facilitate experientially, it's something that one feels, the patient's intrapsychic and social relationships with power and empowerment. So the first stage, in the first stage of critical therapy, we adopt a very traditional approach to power. It's sort of, think about Paulo Freire's banking model, where the patient banks information onto us. We focus on the individual intrapsychic work, think about transference, defenses, dream analysis, and so forth. We enter the therapeutic hour with a commitment to social justice. However, the social justice commitment is not as apparent at first. At this stage, the therapist is seen as an authority figure. Now, I want to pause for a moment and give you an example of how these stages sometimes are not going to be linear. So one of the things you might not know about us is that we work on a sliding scale model. So I say this, I've been to so many conferences and I tell people work on a sliding scale model, people look at me, I look at them. And at one conference, someone in the audience asked me, well, how do you stay in business? I was asking myself, what is he actually asking me? And what I realized, and I challenge all of you out there to think about this, when I say we work on a sliding scale model, people traditionally think, well, you have a fee, whatever it is, $50, $100, $200, whatever it is. And those who cannot afford that fee sort of go down. Well, but implicitly, if you adopt this model, you are privileging rich people because they work X amount of number of hours for that, let's say $100 fee, whereas someone who is a low wage worker works double or triple that time. So in order to not do that, our sliding fee does not have a cap, meaning we see people as low as $5 or free and as high as $2,000, $3,000 a session. And basically, the people who are more affluent support and subsidize the people who are not. Now, this is part of the conversation that needs to happen, obviously, in the first few sessions. So in those sessions, when we talk about, well, what will you be paying, what your fee is, we go from the authority of power to a more collaborative and raising consciousness around that to how are we going to share this space where you get treatment, but also help others in turn. So to go back to our first stage, why do we use this model, this banking model, this traditional approach? Well, we believe it facilitates transference faster and better. And also for oppressed and marginalized people in particular, power is claimed, it's not given. Learning to claim power is necessary for personal and political transformations. The second stage, we move towards an empowering model. This is, think of Paula Freire's term of conscientization model, where we learn how to negotiate power together. Meaning, the patient starts questioning issues around identity with an intersectional lens, questions and analyzes their power individually and structurally. The therapist and the patient start openly discussing the power dynamic within the therapeutic relationship and how the therapist's worldview and relation to power influences the therapeutic relationship. The patient begins to claim and assert their power, while the therapist slowly denounces their power while moving into a more collaborative stance. Together, they also discuss how in seeking power for oneself, whether it's individual power or collective power, there's always a risk of becoming less sensitive to others equally or more disempowered, individually or collectively. I also want to give you an example about this, how ideology is so insidious and how it sort of captivates our minds and our souls in ways that we can't even think. So to go back to our sliding model example, I've had a patient, I want to say this, my patient have taught me so much, and I'm so deeply grateful for them because I think they actually came up with critical therapy. And the work I do with them and my coworkers is so awesome, and I'm so grateful every day to go to work. But so to go back to my patient who we discussed the sliding scale in the beginning. This is months later, maybe even depending on where you are, could be 6 months, 7 months, whatever. And she comes into therapy and she's like, Silvia, I thought about this sliding scale model. And what you are saying to me is that, let's say if I went to buy a TV, I would pay maybe $20 based on my salary, and someone could pay $10,000 for that TV. And I'm like, yeah, that's really how it works. And now this is a person who was very progressive, was very much into sort of adopting a more socialist stance and so forth. And then she tells me this, well, intellectually, that makes sense, but emotionally, it just doesn't sit right. And that obviously led us into a conversation about how ideology comes into the consulting room, but also how ideology is always present in our beliefs and how we constantly need to reevaluate and question ourselves. And more importantly, ask ourselves, how do we live out our politics? So in the third stage, we adopt a more emancipatory model. It is at this stage where we're talking about individual and social transformations. At this stage, the patient and the therapist learn how to negotiate needs and values, and they practice mutuality. Patient learns how to create safer spaces for others and to explore personal and social identities and power. Therapist and patient now meet together to dialogue about the world while recognizing their power. Power is seen as collaborative, and there is a de emphasis of self determination, focusing on reciprocal and mutual relationships. I also want to pause here a little bit just to, make sure that I say this. So this is psychotherapy. It is not school and it is not indoctrination. I think one of the hardest thing for clinicians who are training is to really sort of sit with the possibility that you will have patients, that you will do all this work. And at the end, they will still hold power in the world in such way as to oppress people. They will still sort of colonize people. The only difference, and I think this is helpful, I hope. By the way, we don't have a lot of those folks, but we do have some, right? Because it is psychotherapy. My only hope is that for those folks, when therapies ended and their mental health is in a better space, they also now have a critical analysis of the place in the world. And whatever that place is, or their relationship to power or colonization, they actually know how they're contributing to and are a part of the system in a very real way. So in critical therapy, patients understand oppression as a function of structural inequalities and how those structural issues impact and affect their mental health and well-being. Patients also practice critical thinking skills, learn to negotiate power, learn to negotiate and speak about their needs, and also develop a deep analysis of power. Patients also understand how with power comes responsibility. Critical therapy offers a blueprint for healthier, more authentic, and enriching relationships. And so, social justice meets clinical practice as patients understand how personal fulfillment is part of a seamless web of interpersonal and community connections. So I thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Silvia, and thank you so much for just helping to bring our attention to the role of power in that way. We are now going to move on to Dr. Hargons.
Hey y'all, so thank you so much for having me. I love being the person who gets to listen to the wisdom of Carmen and Silvia first, and I see how we ended up being on this panel together based on what you shared and how it's so related to what I'm going to share. Even though we come from different backgrounds, I think that the work we're doing is so beautiful and complementary, so thank you for showing up. I want to say that I am the founder of the Center for Healing Racial Trauma here in Lexington, Kentucky. And the work we do has two arms. We have a prevention arm and an intervention arm. So the prevention arm is the work that focuses on anti-racism and creating trainings and consultations and workshops so that organizations and institutional policies and practices can do the work they need to do. Largely white organizations and institutions can do the work they need to do to prevent racism, because they have to undo and dismantle the systems of oppression that are built into their systems. Whereas the intervention side is where we focus on providing therapy for people of the global majority. So those of us with racially and ethnically marginalized identities, that is who our work serves. And to the point that was made earlier about having the sliding scale, I love that so much because that's how we operate as well. And the prevention work subsidizes the intervention work such that people who have predominantly white organizations, universities, medical professionals, practices, media companies, all of those who have received consulting or training from us, provide the funding so that we can have a sliding scale where we don't have to check people's pay stubs and have conversations about whether or not you are worthy of this or not. And we never have to turn anyone for inability to pay. So you can just say, my ability to pay would be at this level. And we would provide therapy services at that level until you made a distinction of needing a different payment, up or down. And so I love that model because it's really grounded in our 4 values. So our first value is love. Our second value is equity. Our third value is creativity. And our fourth value is liberation. And that is the way the work is organized. So I'm going to break down how we do our therapy with key lessons I learned about healing came from Black women, healing racial trauma framework. So we were working collectively, a group of 4 Black women clinicians this summer, myself, students that I mentor and train, with an intensive therapy using telehealth. And so we had a week-long session with a client where she had 4 different therapists each day, and we kind of pinpointed what type of therapy we were best suited to provide in addition to what the client needed for that week. So it was an intensive retreat format, but using telehealth. And when we wrapped up on our final day and we had our love and tears and all of the well wishes for our client, she said, Black women saved my life. And I said, you know what, girl, me too. And that's how I operate in the therapeutic presentation. Oh, it says we see gallery. Okay, gotcha. So I'll start with the first Black woman, my mother, Brenda White, who was formerly Brenda Lewis, who taught me to be a warrior, to have courage. And through her migration from the subsidized housing projects of small town Lockport, New York, to the suburbs of Atlanta, and through all of the ways that she navigated stereotypes about her identity as a single mother and as a woman who had 4 children before she was 30, she demonstrated to me, and this informs our therapy, that worthiness is inherent regardless of what stereotypes may be imposed upon you. And so our therapy operates in this warrior and worthiness model. We always remind clients that you were born into this world worthy. Nothing anyone can say about you or say to you can change that, and that you will leave this world worthy. And so we help people remember that as a part of the therapeutic process. And there's a lot of fight that it takes to get back to that remembrance. And so that's where the courage comes in, to speak truth to power to systems that would try to tell you otherwise, to stand up to people who have evaluative power over you or political power over you. And so migration is such an important part of that, because sometimes you need to move physically and mentally from spaces that have been toxic to you. And so we talk with clients about what that means for their growth. And the second woman who birthed my mother, my maternal grandmother, Idell Lewis, she presented the healing mechanism of presentation, which is valuable not for others because you want to look good to other people, but for your peace of mind in realizing that you've shown up as your best self despite the circumstances. And so her idea of what order and beauty could be from a working class Black woman's background, what I would call the opulence that she was able to create, the beauty that she was able to create around her, would be one of the things that I took into how we structure our sessions and how we think about what's important for clients, how they set the order for themselves. And my paternal grandmother, Willeen Jones, showed me authenticity and community connection. She is the type of woman who will cuss you out and cook you a plate, who will go to church, but identify who needs to be beat down in the community and who is doing harm. And she holds no punches. And that authenticity, being able to hold these seemingly conflicting aspects of self and to love both of them, is what we move clients into as we do our work together. And she also demonstrated for me the power of collective care or community connection. So I always remind clients that you cannot heal in isolation. You weren't born to do that as a human being. That connection to your community is important. Sometimes through internalized depression, we really get divorced from the people who loved us and made us who we are, who have cared about us. And so we do that work on community connection to help people remind themselves of the value of being in solidarity with folks who look like them and who love on them. The other woman in my life who gave me the framing of Black joy and affirmation as a function of healing is Tanya Crowell. And she is my aunt, my favorite aunt. And back when I first started my program, when I first started my job here at the University of Kentucky, she left me with some words of just how wonderful things had been, how proud she was of me. But throughout my life, she always showed me that you have to have fun. Even being able to hold joy with rage, hold joy with pain was essential to your well-being. And from very early on, she affirmed that I could do anything, that I could be anything. And her affirmation in Black joy was embedded into my way of being in the world. And it comes up in my client work now because I'm a cheerleader for them. I invite them to use affirmations to talk back to themselves or to talk to the people that they love in this work. And also to find things that were joyful for them as they were children. So the things you love, was it music? Was it dance? Was it journaling? Was it writing? Was it painting? Was it jump rope? Was it fun Black girl games? All of those people, all of those pieces of healing that you naturally related to when you were younger, I invite clients to bring them back. So for some of my clients, and when I'm thinking about the retreat that we held earlier, I was like, well, you know what? We used to have these Black girl games that we would play with our hands like this. Maybe we can do something fun like that with the client. And that nostalgia for her was very healing because she was doing inner child work. So having a sense of play and a sense of joy in therapy is a part of healing racial trauma. So those are the theorists in my life, the ones that you wouldn't be able to have access to that I wanted to share with you. But I'm going to share the 10 others who you would be able to read and draw upon. I always say I work with a love ethic, and that comes directly from Bell Hooks. A love ethic presupposes that people deserve to live fully and well. And so all that I do is to operate in a way that helps people live fully in the well by their definition, by the way they believe living fully and well is. And as long as it is not seeking to dominate or harm others, that they should have access to the resources and the opportunities to do that. So I try to create those in the therapy work by helping them think about what living fully and well is for them, having them define it for themselves and let that be the goal that we work toward. And then I work through Audre Lorde's erotic and the power of the erotic, fearlessness, and anger. The power of these forces that for many marginalized people, they try to separate us from, because the use of the erotic as power has been so puritanically reorganized and suppressed that people often forget that sexual energy, sensual energy, and erotic energy are essential creative and transformative power sources in the human experience. And so helping people understand and get in touch with that sensuality, that erotic, and what that means for them is critical to my work. One, because I'm also a sex researcher, but two, because it really works that way. Yes, pleasure activism, absolutely. And that fearlessness. So recognizing that even when you feel afraid, you should do it anyway is important for clients, especially as they're thinking about what they need to do to set themselves free, how they approach liberation through talking back or clapping back or setting boundaries. All of those pieces are integrated into our therapy work. And then finally, anger, helping people reclaim the power of anger, the utility, the catalyst that is anger, is essential in our therapy work, because so many people have had to suppress anger to survive, have had their anger policed and surveyed such that the energy from anger is misused or turned internally. And so I help clients express that externally. Sometimes you need to yell. Sometimes you need to raise your voice. Sometimes you need to use anger in a way that sets you free. And then I move on to Toni Morrison, because she reminds us, and I then use that in turn to remind clients what our real job is. It doesn't matter if my job on paper is assistant professor or director of the Center for Healing Racial Trauma. My real job is to free others. Your real job is to free others. And so in your dissertation work, it's to free others. In your therapy work, it's to free others. If you are in corporate America, your job is still to free others. And when you remember what your real job is, you start to show up in a way that helps you do that. So reminding clients of what their real job is, what they came into this world to do, is a part of our healing racial trauma work. And Toni Morrison also reminds us that distraction is the function of racism. And so to talk about how the lies of racism, these myths and stereotypes about who racially and ethnically marginalized people are, seeks to distract us from our inherent worthiness and our inherent creativity and talent and beauty and contribution, is important reminder, because racism seeks to organize our emotional space, and we help clients divest from that in their daily living. Then I draw on Kamara Jones's threefold model of racism. So she's a past president of the American Public Health Association. And that threefold model of racism breaks it down that racism is institutionalized, it's personally mediated, and it's internalized. Much of the work I do at the Center for Healing Racial Trauma is helping people deal with those race-based stress reactions and race-based stress symptoms that have come up from microaggressions or systemic racism that they have faced. But a lot of it is also working on the internalized racism, that sense that they don't think they deserve or are worthy of anything, as Carmen mentioned earlier, that they don't feel that without really, really, really hard work that they are valuable in the world. And it's exhausting. So I'm working with people who are burnt out, who are exhausted because they have been trying to prove the lies of racism wrong, as instead of just showing up fully and well. So that's a lot of the healing racial trauma work. And then I build on Alice Walker's womanism. And so I love Alice Walker as a literary theorist, and she says, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. And it's a specific way of understanding women of color's feminism and how it's seeking for the well-being of all humanity. And so that organizes the way I do therapy, because I think about, to build on the next theorists, Kimberly Crenshaw and Patricia Hill Collins, these constructs of intersectionality and matrix of domination. I learned about both of those at the same time. And you're not just Black and not woman and not cis and not heterosexual. You're all of those things. And the intersection of your privileged and marginalized identities compounds or detracts from the way that pain shows up in your life, the way that exhaustion shows up in your life, the way that all of these symptoms that we think about when we think about psychopathology show up. Intersectionality gives us the language that there's no one on earth who hasn't had a privilege, but our privileges and our marginalizations really inform each other, and we can't be separated. So it's about becoming a whole person through understanding that. And then I draw upon Janet Helms's work for racial identity development. So that's a part of the assessment process for me, to work with the client in the initial intake and to understand where they come in on their racial identity development journey. And so if they're in an immersion phase, that means that they have anger and that it's righteous and it's understandably focused on dismantling these systems of oppression. And so we use that while they're in that phase. And then I help them understand what it might look like to get into an internalization or commitment phase. Less frequently, we have people in the pre-encounter phase because they're coming to the Center for Healing Racial Trauma. But when we do, we help awaken them to the understanding of how racism has operated in their lives. And then I build on my psychology mother, Dr. Rosie Davis's work, where she talks about how deep poverty intersects with all of these pieces. Because from that class analysis of how many marginalized people have experienced deep poverty, and that imposition of scarcity has been something we've been faced with. And so it's turned us in many ways against our best selves. I bring that into the therapy room. And she also talks about drawing the circle bigger, so that I don't get into these positions of power that I have occupied throughout my psychology career, so that I can power hoard. I get in as an intentional infiltrator, and I learn what I need to learn about those systems, and then I reflect them back to the people who are seeking to dismantle those systems. So as I move through these different positions of power, it's not with the idea that you get power and you hoard it and you realize the privileges and benefits and the status of it, but that my participation in those power structures on those advocacy sides is to highlight the hidden curriculum behind them for people who want to do things differently. And I would say that one of my mentees, Della Mosley, is also a great teacher of mine, and she developed a critical consciousness development model. And so thinking about how that works for Black activists in particular translates into our healing racial trauma work, so that you need the education. You need to really re-educate yourself on what has been done with, for, and to people of color. And we're thinking about a global context and a United States context. And what's that knowledge? What do you do with it? So she presents a compendium of all of these modalities of healing, like storytelling, or what Carmen named as testimonial for Latinas, or poetry, or community engagement and healing, or other arts-based therapies. All of these ways that activists have healed themselves or worked towards their healing, they are invited into my work. And the power of resistance as a healing racial trauma strategy, that you don't heal so that you can be well, but that resistance is a facilitator of wellness for yourself and others. And I'd add Maya Angelou in there, amplifying the work of arts-based therapy. So Maya Angelou's story and poetry and dance and writing as ways that we can heal, as ways that we come to know ourselves and reclaim self-awareness. And then I'd finally add that as I'm emerging as a person who's doing therapy and has been doing it for a decade, a care praxis, that in order to do this work well, healing racial trauma work is exhausting. It's taxing. Resistance work is exhausting and it's taxing. And so I invite us to also have a care praxis where we understand the function of 4 strategies: numbing, self-care, soul care, and collective care. And so some of us have thought we were doing healing racial trauma work through numbing all year long, and we haven't been. Numbing is necessary, but it's not necessarily the thing that will keep us well. It just means that for some time you don't need to feel because things are painful. And if you're having a tooth extracted, you certainly want to be numb for a moment, but you don't always want to numb, because then that prevents you from also being able to access the good parts of life, the deep knowing of yourself. So self-care is the therapy. Self-care is the journaling. Self-care is the going to sleep on time, the waking up at a decent hour. The self-care is eating well. All of these pieces that take care of our bodies and our minds. And the soul care is our prayer and our meditation and our hoodoo and our hiking and our communing with nature, and all of these pieces that remind us that we are connected to something larger than just mind and body, something spiritual. And collective care is what we do with and for others, whether it's a family Zoom night or an event like this, or cuddling with a loved one, or being at a protest. So all of those pieces, all learned from Black women, inform the healing racial trauma therapy work that we do at the Center for Healing Racial Trauma. And I just enjoyed having a chance to share them with you. And so I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much. You had so many just bits and pieces of knowledge there that I think people are really resonating with. And I think, just as far as distraction, I just think about the way you're talking about not being distracted from this core message of love and care. And so that is really nice. Okay, so I am going to, we want to hear from you as an audience or attendees. And we have the Q&A open, but we also had a question for you about doing this work. So we're just going to throw this out there. This question: what messages have you received about enacting decolonizing practices? So this is something that you can reflect on as you've taken in these different presentations. I will just note that this particular site is more of a public site. So if you feel like you don't mind that being public, go ahead and put it in there. And if not, I think you're free to just reflect on it, of course. And I'm just going to send out what that code is if you want to put that out there. And then I'll stop sharing this and we'll go back. And I just wanted to talk about what some of the themes are in these presentations and all of this knowledge sharing. I think about like the flesh of theory and how that really grounds us into our experience and keeps us from being overly impacted in just one part of our whole being. And so when we talk about the flesh and the body, you know, that seems like the whole being that you experience is part of that decolonizing work that you're all doing. The oral tradition is also something that I heard, and, you know, just different themes there in terms of the ancestral knowledge that you are bringing into your work and the community knowledge that you have as well. And so you're a person who is giving voice. And when you hear this voice, it's like we're hearing many voices in what we experience perhaps as one voice. And I also think that, you know, through these presentations, there's this notion of empowerment. And I think where we can think about decolonizing is in self-determination. And when we think about self-determination, it's the self of our peoples that are determining the future that we are going to collectively create with our peoples. And so I think that's also something that was really present within what you all talked about. So I'm gonna start off with a question for you all to think about and answer. So amid the many issues attributed to the use of social media, including human rights violations, how can we help cultivate decolonial healing and community amid this pandemic beyond individual psychotherapy? So Carmen, Silvia, Candice, feel free to jump in there.
I think I'm trying to be on mute.
You're on mute now.
Oh, I'm on mute, okay.
Yeah.
Well, first I would like to say that it was so wonderful for me to hear that the three of us are pretty much, you know, our work is really geared to, as you say, bringing the voices of those that have been before us, our ancestor, and then helping that our own voices to then be strengthened to want to pass that on. I have stories about my mother, for example, that I have published, so that it's in the book that Lillian and others, Lillian and I co-edited, and it really shows that as you say, that grouping of those people that had empowered us to then go on. So how can we do this? How can we help, or what should we take into consideration now beyond, during the pandemic and beyond the pandemic? So as we know, people, our people have been impacted both at the economic and at the health level and at the death level than other groups, at least here in the United States. So there will be remnants. There will be it will be important to follow, keeping these stressors in mind. And at the same time, I think that the resilience that has been, that we see with the people that come to us is one way of helping all of us to go through these difficult times. And as I told you yesterday, I think that psychologists, we need to also be political. We need political in the sense that we need to pass on the word. We need to take it to the different voices, to the different ears that will then hear what it is that we need. And we are a big number. So I think I am hopeful that this is going to work together. together. And this is, as I said, this is the voices of the three of us, and for the voices throughout the whole conference. And it's really like, wow, we are all exactly on the same page. And let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia or
Candice? I'll jump in and say that I like to use social media to do that. And so when the memo came out that became the executive order that was about racist and sexist training, the racist and sexist executive order that came out, basically, I really went to social media and said, y'all see this? Like, what's going on here? And this is why I won't be following it. And so I've had, opportunities canceled, people saying, oh, well, we have to reconsider because we don't want to risk losing our funding. And I really think it depends on what you're willing to risk. And I don't have any judgment for anyone depending on what you can and cannot be willing to risk right now based on what resources you're providing for your family and what that means for you. But when you are in a position like I am, where I have the opportunity to speak out more because of all of the privileges that I hold, then I feel like I need to use that to say, fuck this. I'm not doing it. Like, I'm not going to follow it. And so I'm going to continue to do these trainings and continue to do these workshops and continue to do this work because I'm not going to succumb to the egos or whims of people who shouldn't be in power anyway. And I think that type of pushback, if you can do it, because everyone can't, if you can do it a little bit, even if it may cost you something. And if you can't, we got you until you get there, until you can do it based on whatever your life experiences are, because that's the exhausting part of this, that we have to share the risk and share the burden of that. And I just happen to be in this current moment in my life in a position where I can hold that a little bit more. And so I use social media to have those conversations, to share ideas about that, to make sure that people understand what my positionality is in all of this work. And then folks can have conversation and dialogue around that. You can talk back, but then I'm also very actively involved in policy setting. So I go to city council meetings and school board meetings as well. I just was elected to the board of the APA. And so that's going to be another opportunity to do that work in an anti-racist way and an anti-oppressive way. And so I think that I'm about being at the grassroots and the grass tops. And while I can, I will. And then when I need to rest, which is real, then I will rest. And I know that other people are coming alongside me who will take up that mantle.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think social media, I think sort of being political. I think one of the things we need to remember is we're always already political. Because we're not talking about politics, like who you're voting for. What we're talking about is political issues such as access to healthcare, access to childcare, and so forth. All those issues are interconnected to mental health. They're not political. They're actually part of our lives, and the political is part of our lives. I also think one of the questions was around community. I think communities are a great source for empowerment. See, one is not empowered by oneself. We get empowered within a community of people. So I think it's important, especially for experts, psychotherapists, doctors, and so forth, for us to really sort of be a little more humbled and realize that there's so many resources, and we need to amplify the voices of those who don't go to conferences, of those who don't have access to, some of the privileges that we do. And how do we make sure that we put them at the forefront to teach us different ways of healing that maybe we haven't been aware of or haven't even thought of. So I think it's always sort of personally checking ourselves, checking our privilege, and also being aware that we have some power to amplify voices and be alongside those who don't. And how do we make sure that they get those, privileges and power and so forth.
On that note of healing, we have a question from Karina Vargas. And Karina, can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, and greetings from the land of Huetars, which is Heredia, Costa Rica. And thanks for all what you have shared this morning. And I just wanted to know, as I wrote there, what could you say about the need for therapists to go through their own healing process in order to, let's say, internalize the praxis and empathy, experience this decolonization with your own body, this liberation ourselves, in order to later go and try to achieve the same thing with the people we're going to work with? Because sometimes I think we can be tempted to try to enter these in ourselves through theory and watching the praxis of others. But well, I was wondering how this has been also for yourselves, your own healing process, and how this affects your practice.
Can I answer that?
Yes, Silvia, please.
Oh, thank you so much for that question. I think it's such a relevant question. So for me, I've always said this to folks, I think therapy saved my life. But I will also say this, that for critical therapists in particular, and we have these conversations with people coming in wanting to train with us. This is hard work. It is hard work because it's not just intrapsychic work. It takes into account your place within a social political arena, your race, your gender, and so forth. And you're playing and you're talking to your patients about it. So you have to do your own internalized work of decolonization and so forth. But I think what's also important to remember, and we have long conversations about this, some of the challenges in critical therapy is, for some of the people of color in our program, this work is even much more painful because revisiting racism from as a Black person is much more painful and difficult than for me, for example. So I think it's important, two things, that you do your own work, but also that you get the support and that you feel, that you have a community, again, of people who support you while you do this work with your patients. And I also, what I say to people is, I think as a therapist, if you want to be a clinician, I say this to everyone, be on the other side of the couch. What we say to people in critical therapy is you have to go at some point and do critical therapy with a critical therapist, because you cannot sort of ask someone to interrogate their whole life without you having done it first. You can't ask someone to be so vulnerable, so raw, to interrogate power if you haven't done it yourself. So I think that's very important for, any practicing clinician.
Great, thank you. Carmen?
Yes. Well, I would like to say that in my experience, and I was director of training, I have trained hundreds of people for years and years. That will tell you about my age. Perhaps many of them are listening right now. And my experience has been that the clinicians, or the people that want to be clinicians, for the most part, have already that desire to be helpful. They want to help. So with the right supervisors that can teach what these stresses are, the experiences, working with the population that are going through these stressors. I have found that, because I have supervised many people that are not necessarily Latinos, they come from many different backgrounds and actually different part of the world. And I think that the understanding and part of the teaching of this type of modality is really to have the person understand what it is like to be in those shoes, and to make the to help the trainee to understand that they are not necessarily they don't have to have been through that experience necessarily in order to have to be able to understand, so that if they suffering or oppression can be from many different, can be explained in many different angles. So you can be oppressed by different stressors. And if you can understand that if you can feel that, if you can be culturally, practice cultural humility, or practice, I don't know how we feel, but and being able to listen on what it is that you have been through can also be very helpful in the training of a person that people have issues with what is a culturally competent therapist, but basically it is really competence overall.
Great, thank you, thank you. So there's a question about wanting to understand, Dr. Hargons, what you introduced about holding the joy with the pain. And so how do you work with that in complex trauma work? So people who've had multiple traumas and histories of traumas. And if I'm thinking, Carmen and Silvia, if you also want to, if you see that in your work too, and if you have examples, maybe you can add that into. Candice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my team and I did a retreat for Black women survivors of sexual assault a few weeks ago. And there were about 17 women, many of whom have complex trauma. And we were working with Ampersand, a nonprofit out here that works with survivors of sexual assault. And we'd previously given them a training on healing racial trauma and why that's necessary for survivors of sexual assault who have racially and ethnically marginalized identities. And so they were like, yes, we see that. We now want to do this. And so we ended up working with the women there. And joy and pleasure, a sex positive focus, was the way we trained. And they said they very rarely received sex positive messages, very rarely received joy. We had a dance session where we did like 5 minutes of twerking and laughter, and that was in addition to unpacking incest and crying and being able to be validated by other women who had been through similar experiences, and creating a holding space and a corrective emotional experience. It always goes together when you're moving towards wellness. But a lot of times we are trained to focus on how to heal outside of understanding that joy and laughter is a function of a well person. Like your access to that shows you that you're moving towards wellness, and we limit ourselves from having it because we don't think we're worthy of it anymore after we've experienced a number of traumas. And so just talking about how the women had said, I don't know if I can have sexual pleasure again. And we say, you get to have it on your terms when you're ready in this way, but this is what you can think about when you feel ready again. So holding all of those pieces together is a part of, I think, a healthy human experience. And it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. We wish people didn't have trauma after trauma after trauma, systemically, interpersonally, all of that. But to only focus on the trauma and healing from a vantage points of targeting symptoms, as opposed to bringing in the things that keep us well or sustain those moments when you do feel good and feel well, I think is compromising a person's ability to heal and still love and live fully.
Okay, thank you. Carmen?
For me, I apply, and this is with all women, but it's a very prevalent concept in the Latino culture, the understanding of Marianismo. And Marianismo is a concept that implies, it's the opposite of machismo, it's the other side. And then it is really expectations of women that they are capable or are expected to withstand all suffering and kind of just go on and on and on. And then not complain. So in my work, Marianismo applies across all levels of generations. For example, when I published the first book on Marianismo, there were journalists asking, well, but this is not really, this doesn't exist anymore. Women don't go behind men anymore to, they don't walk behind men like you do in the monarchy of Japan, for example. And I said, no, they do not walk behind the man. But then we go through all of the examples of how a woman is often the one who is doing all the work, who is responsible for the children. Even though the man might help, it always ends up that the woman feels guilty. She's not able to then go and be a good daughter. So that's the familismo, and be that great sister or that great friend. And eventually, as Candice was saying, they forget about the taking care of self. So I also just like Candice, promote the not feeling guilty for taking care of yourself. In fact, it is your responsibility to take care of yourself so that then you can go on and be as successful or as functional as you want to be.
Thank you. And Carmen, can you follow up on another question related to this, which is, for some people, I'm so sorry. Familismo continues to, yes, I apologize. It continues to be controversial, although important and fundamental, because for some people it's a source of pain and trauma. And so how do you hold the tension without taking away of the cultural value that it has?
Very, very wonderful question, because I do speak, and the literature speak a lot about the familismo is a very valued concept, but at the same time, it can put a lot of pressure and stressor on the person that, or particularly on the woman, but on members of the family. So yes, we do work with that, and there's definitely an exploration on how familismo can be just as detrimental. For example, one of the work that I have done with a Latina, for example, that comes to mind, where she's expected to have the brother-in-law come and live in the house, even though he comes at all hours of the night, he's drinking, he's not being considerate, he's dumping things all over the place. And what am I going to do? It's my brother-in-law. So then the work is, no, there has to be taking care of yourself, and then you work with the pressure of the culture and the understanding that in the times when things were expected of the family, people live in farms, there was that interdependence. People didn't have to go and take a train or travel all over the place. That there have been changes that need to be understood, because that's one of the pressures that women feel. And that is one of the negative consequences, but they are wonderful consequences of support in the family. And that is also encouraged to take advantage of.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Amy Portella. Can you please unmute and ask your question? Here we go.
Hey, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I had two different questions, but my first one was directed at Dr. Carmen Vazquez, which is, I'm not sure if I should ask the question in English or Spanish, porque igual saludos desde Puerto Rico. But for purposes of the audience understanding, having a more common language maybe, from your experience, perhaps, what advice would you give to clinical psychologists in formation, such as myself, when applying testimonial therapy with participants that are still struggling with a strong internalized coloniality? This can be particularly difficult, at least in my case. I come from Puerto Rico. So we are currently living in a colony still. So I wanted to ask a question, perhaps something, of course, the Dr. Hargons and Dr. Silvia. I'm sorry, I wish I could pronounce your last name better. But feel free to.
Okay, well, hola, bienvenida, Jenny. advice to a person that brings this stressor or this feeling is to first acknowledge the reality. And that is one of the things that I speak about in explaining this testimonial therapy, that really what is out there and is real. I will be disingenuous as a therapist if I would not say this is real. So the reality, the experience of whatever experience is presented to me, but that come from the oppressor or the issues of colonialism. And I happen to I'm Dominican, but I was married. My first husband was from Puerto Rico, so Puerto Rico to me is my second land. I love Puerto Rico and the culture. So that is a reality, is there. And then my answer will be depending on what she's presenting. If it is an issues of gender, then I will deal with that. If it is on issues of profession or her agency, whatever she's presenting, the first thing I will do is say, yes, I agree with you. And then let's just deal with whatever she's presenting.
Silvia?
I think that's precisely the work of good psychotherapy, decolonizing one's mind. I think it's sort of, sure, people come to us with many histories, many ways of seeing themselves in the world. And the way they define their place in the world, the way they internalize issues around beauty, around self-determination, participation, rights, and so forth are always clouded by our society and our ideology. I think good therapy, I don't think anyone could say, I'm a great therapist and not do that work. I mean, sure, maybe your patients doesn't necessarily bring it into the consulting room, but they do. In the ways they see themselves, in the ways they define beauty, in the ways they define their power. So I think as a therapist, it's important to do that work while also doing the intrapsychic work because they're always interrelated. They can't be separate.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to agree. I agree with both of what you said. It's so true.
Thank you. So I'm just going to summarize. We've had some people share what messages they've gotten about decolonizing practices. Some people have gotten nothing. Some people have heard messages that it's unprofessional, and some people have gotten really like powerful messages about story, power, and a love ethic. Can you all talk about how you have negotiated barriers to decolonizing practices? And there have been many questions that relate to things like outcome measures, assessments, and perhaps integrate some of these practices as well, and how you think about that. Silvia?
Yeah. Wow. So one of the things I would say is, for us particularly, the therapeutic relationship is the most important blueprint that you will have on how to have other healthy relationship with others. Meaning that through the therapy, you work through intrapsychic problems as well as societal problems and address them together with your therapist. I think what's really important about that is that to challenge one's place in the world, including yourself as a therapist, it's important that you develop a relationship based on mutuality and based on respect. And, you know, one of the things I also want to say for clinicians out there regarding sort of what are some of the methods, right? Well, I think people come to therapy because they don't know this, but they're actually looking for a relationship. It's a very human endeavor. It's a very human existential thing that we do together. We question the world, we alleviate some mental health issues, and we, hopefully both of us, are changed because of it. I think it's very important that people remember that, and that we don't focus too much on, you know, the cognitive behavioral like distortions of our thoughts and let's move on. And once you're better because we've met these 10 goals. So also, and this is the last thing I'll add, is that one of the things I've learned, because I learned so much from the people that come and train with us, is that each therapist has their own style, and each therapist sort of has their own methods of healing based on their histories, based on their ancestry, based on their training. And I think good therapy should incorporate what are your personal methods of healing that work for you, as well as what are your patients' methods of healing that work for them. It's a collaboration. If someone likes our therapy, include that, or, you know, sort of thing, maybe I'm not the right therapist for you. You should go with someone who has experience with this. So I think it's again, it's a dynamic that happens between two people, and discovering what works for everyone, much in line with Paulo Freire. Every session is different because every patient is different.
Thank you, Silvia. Carmen?
Okay, for me, I see, I think you said to explain how we have sort of moved along, and I share some history yesterday with you, where I was trained in a dynamic theory in the City University of New York. I think I received good training there, where the reality of diversity and the beginning, for me as a beginning therapist, of understanding the importance of culture. We are not the same, we are all different, so that the patient will self-reflect within the process of therapy, and will, as I said, trying to, or by sharing the story, is an expression of what that person has been through. So the benefit that should be received from therapy, and I have had my therapy myself for years, to understand when one is not being understood by the therapist. But I was lucky to have had therapists too that understood me. That the one that didn't, I move on and went to somebody else. But just the ability to, for the therapist to move on with what works. I think I could tell you what I shared with you yesterday. My very first patient, I received a blouse as a gift. At that time, part of the training was that blouse, you don't receive gifts. Obviously, you also have to be mindful that you don't, receiving gift, accepting gift could be an exploitation. But if it is cultural, it is also part of what that person that is coming to see you believes, and maybe wants to please you, or then you want to explore that, but might also just be part of who she is. It's like we knock on the door when the door is locked. It's what we have been taught. So I was blessed that I was one of my wonderful supervisors, and I will be very happy to mention his name, AJ Franklin. When I said to him, what should I do with the blouse? He said, wear it. So that opened for me, began to open a door of understanding, where I needed to adapt what I have learned to continue being ethical, to continue being as professional as I could be, to be as thorough as I could be. I take my profession very seriously, but at the same time also looking at what is it that works, what doesn't work, what doesn't make sense. And also we do already have research that can inform us. We have research with our population that informs us on what works and what doesn't work. And then we are also moving on to continue expanding what works.
Thank you, Carmen. Candice?
I really feel like y'all said it. I mean, I feel like we're in such sync here. I'm trying to think if there's anything unique I would add. I try to only jump in if I feel like I have something different to add, and it really kind of aligns with where I'm at with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, I hear you adding your voice in community, and I think that is something that we also don't necessarily give credit for, which is to say yes. And so I say yes with you.
Yes.
I think what is really clear through all of your presentations is how we have the strength and we have the resources and we have the capacities for our healing. And we know we have barriers, we know we have incredible challenges. And so for you each to take the time with who you are ancestrally and communally connected with to share and bring this pot of knowledge and sharing, I think is so powerful. And so I think this is a really good way to close. And I thank you all for your stories and for what you have given to this conference and presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you for
now,
having me.
yeah.
Thanks.
And now we have dancers.
Wait,
right?
I do have to say this before. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was so fun. And to the attendees, to the relatives out there who have asked questions, I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of your questions. I tried to bring as many voices as I could into this. And I just would share that when you put out a question, I sometimes think of this as like it's the spirit that gets released in that. So even if all of these questions didn't come to the forefront, I just think about those questions being carried on the wind to do their work. So thank you for putting that out there as well. And now I will turn it over.
Thank you, Consuelo. I'm just feeling very inspired and just happy to have been part of these 3 days and hearing all the speakers' knowledge. And for today, we will end our last conference day with a performance by dancers from the Flex Dance program. So I will want to introduce them and kind of tell you a little bit about what the Flex Dance program is, and make sure that we give a warm welcome to the 3 dancers that we have for today, Marie, Steve, and Smiley. So the Flex Dance program was founded around 2014, and it's an arts education nonprofit that fosters positive growth among young people in difficult circumstances. Dance is at the core of what they do. The way they do that is through dance mentorship sessions for youth in institutions and in the community. The Flex Dance program employs renowned dancers from local communities to develop routines with students, promoting self-esteem, cooperation, and communication. They seek to transform physical energy into positive nonverbal self-expression that offers an alternative to conflict. Creative development is a key component of the program. Artists instruct and perform as part of the company, and they hope to sustain future efforts through the income generated through these endeavors. Students are likewise encouraged to join the company. Some examples of the programs that they have are Flex in Detention Foster Care, Flex Out for Kids Within Communities, and Flex World Global Academy for Dancers Online. So if you want to know more about the program and give some financial support to the program, please go to their website, flexdanceprogram.org, or find them on Instagram as Flex Dance Program. So with that, I leave you with our 3 dancers, Marie, Steve, and Smiley.
Hi,
We said for the past several weeks that with this coronavirus situation, you're going to see a continued spreading.
That spreading is inevitable.
After the tone.
Mooney, let's not play these games, alright? You already know my body. This is like my summertime calling when it's going straight to voicemail. That's a problem. I wish you really would sit there and tell me that you don't see my calls either. I'm watching you through your boy's Instagram story, and you sitting here really DJing for these black ass dancers. Let me tell you something. You think you heard my mouth, but you haven't heard my mouth yet. Wait till you come home tonight. I got something for you. Fuck you and them dancers.
Fíjate que la